Let me see. I guess we can get started here. Okay. This is the April 5th, 2016 work session. First item on the open work session agenda is Pirates Wharf.
Anything else you can find controversial before we get started?
Be nights happy.
I guess question would be kind of give us a good idea of what's going on with Pirates Wharf, what's going on with the forest, like know what's going on with the house, just get an idea of where we are with things, because I don't think the council's quite aware of the entire plan.
Sure. As I mentioned in my State of the Union, state county address, yeah,
We're thinking big here. Slow down.
You mean it another time, don't you, Mr.
yeah, could be a short while right now. Pirates Wharf has been owned by the county for over 20 years, and I just felt like it was time to get it off the books as just being farmland and hunting rights. So that's what I had hoped to do. I see now that that was a mistake bringing it out so early before we had a developed plan. And after listening to the people tonight, I have to agree that what I need to finish up is maybe the plan. Let the plan come forward. But let me tell you where we are, just to let you know a couple things too. In developing Pirates Wharf as a park or county recreational facilities, what we hope to do is to have hiking trails, bike trails there, bird watching down by the river, Bob Forest area, that type of thing, canoeing and kayaking. So those are all going to be strong points, as well as just being able to see some of the land. Now there's some of the land that we can probably still come back and plant new forest on, is what we're hoping to do, some of that area down there. So we're working on that with a couple people. But after tonight, I really feel that, we have used the Parks and Recreation Department very strongly in what we're doing, and they give us guidance as far as what type of recreation they feel would be best down there. So that's what we're following. We're working again.
Excuse me, Bob. Matt, could you go in the hall and ask them to take out? They're having trouble hearing back there. Sorry, Bob.
No, that's okay. No. So our basic plans are just to go ahead and develop it within the next couple of years. It's under farm lease now for another year and a half. So we are just trying to get ideas for what people want to see out there and what they'd like to do. Regarding the house, our first step, we did send Mr. Matthews, compliance officer, so he knew all the building codes. To bring the house up to code will be over $100,000. If we were to use it for any type of facilities, we of course would have to sprinkle it. That's going to be probably a lot more money. The problem we're having as much with the house now as anything is it's termite ridden. And I'm going to ask someone to go down next week to actually do a good termite report. So it's probably worth a couple $100 to get that done, not knowing how far the damage is gone. As I told you before, the first floor has actually rotted through to the ground. So all the joists have been eaten through there. So could it be rebuilt? I don't know at this point in time. So, but if it could.
What year was the house built?
What we have been given by Mr. Canode, I mean, he actually did a plat for us showing us the diagram of the house, and he had told us it was built partially in 1947, partially in 1955. So it's two separate additions to the house.
Not overly historic.
Well, there's some question as to the foundation.
The foundation may go back further.
Foundation may go back
Okay.
much earlier than that.
I received an email that specifically said that it was listed on the historical registry.
That we met today with Ed Otter, who had done the archaeological study. Listing it on the Maryland registry doesn't necessarily mean that it's quote-unquote historic. The foundation is what's of interest. We've actually asked Mr. Otter to give us a proposal for what's called a Phase 1 archaeological survey, and that will yield a lot more information as to the archaeological importance of the property, which is mainly along the shoreline of the property. The structure itself above the foundation is 40s, 50s vintage.
Another thing should be noted that there is a cemetery up on the property, and Mr. Otter, being an archaeologist, we've engaged him today to go out there and delineate where the cemetery is, find out how big it is, and clear it off to make those necessary ways of preserving that.
Is there stones?
There are stones, they're not headstones, they're like flat
Footstones,
stones, what we've been shown.
foot stones, yeah.
I have not seen them yet,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Are you planning on harvesting any of the timber?
That's still with the, still foresters. I've got it to the commission, Ms. Stribling's commission there. They're looking at it too, as far as just looking
Yeah.
to see whether or not. And it's not, that's something maybe we'll go ahead and clear up now. It's never was intended to be a clear cut.
I understand that.
It was only going to be a select cut. And what they told us was because of its thickness there, it was not allowing new growth to grow off the forest floor. So it's not like we're trying to do that. The money part is not the important part of this. The important part was to continue the forest in a healthy manner, to let it keep on and regenerate itself.
Maybe you could get Mr. Hurd to come in, Matt Hurd, who wrote up the forest plan, and meet with us one day,
Well, yeah,
so we could
That'd be fine.
discuss it.
We,
Discuss that.
we met with Mr. Hurd because we really wanted to better understand his report, and I think we gave council copies
Yeah,
of
we
that
have it.
report.
Yeah.
And there are two stands out front that are seriously overstocked. And to put it as simply as I can, there are really two schools of thought. And you heard one school of thought expressed this evening that, you let nature take its course, and if the forest dies or part of the forest dies, it goes ahead and dies. The Maryland State Department of Natural Resources would not agree with that assessment. And if I could liken it, if a person, gets ill, just let nature take its course. Don't take any prescriptive measures that would extend, that person's life. That's really what we're looking to do here. And the notion that we're clear cutting the entire forest and that we're doing it for the value of the timber is just simply not the case.
I live within a good strike with a golf ball from the Wicomico County forest.
Right.
And it's harvested yearly, different sections of it.
Right.
And I've hunted that forest since I was 10 years old. I don't hunt anymore, but over the years. The day we went for the ride to look at the roads, remember you were there?
Yes.
That's where we're at,
Right.
Wicomico. It's demonstration forest.
Right.
And it's managed.
Managed forest.
It's a managed forest, and the tree, they'll cut a small part, the trees grow back up. So it provides wildlife with small growth this tall, right on up to a mature tree. So I think Mr. Hurd, when I read that timber cruise that he did, he explained it pretty well. But it would be good if he came and explained it to everybody.
And we've taken no final decision. This is work in progress, and we're trying to determine the best use of that property, and we're focused on outdoor recreation, ecotourism, light impact tourism, and we believe that's the best use of the property, and we think it's an appropriate use of the property, but as Bob said, county's owned the property for 20 years and nothing much has occurred there. We would like to begin to make use of it. It's part of an overall effort in the county to really focus on eco-tourism, light impact outdoor recreation. So we think Pirates Wharf is a great place to launch that kind of an initiative. It is a beautiful property. So it's really where we are.
Well, I mean, I commend you for that. I mean, I've heard a lot about Pirates Wharf. It's in District 2, so there's been quite a few people that have mentioned that. And I appreciate the idea of a plan. And as I've expressed before, I'm very much not anti-logging at all. My family comes from timber industry. Growing up, timber industry is what supported my family. I would say that it might be a good idea to consider the logging as part of the once you have the overall plan. I mean,
Yes.
there are different types of cutting you can do depending on what type of forest you want, whether you want a managed forest or a wild forest. I mean,
Right.
and again, one can be as good as the other. I mean, and logging is perfectly acceptable in certain types of forest, and certain type of, pre-commercial thinning is better than, I mean, so I appreciate the idea that you want the plan to, the plan, I would say the timber part should be part of that plan, and if, the plan comes, and if that timber is, fits in with the overall aspect, I think that's perfectly fine. But logging it's a means to an end. It's not necessarily an end of itself. And sometimes your ends don't necessarily need logging, and sometimes they certainly do. I've seen plenty of good forest management practices that have enhanced the health of forests. So don't get me wrong there. But I do appreciate the plan idea and doing it as part of a plan. So,
Mr. Kramer, you had a question?
It wasn't a question. I wanted to speak to the thought that the county has owned the property for more than 20 years, which is quite correct. The people that sat in those chairs more than 20 years ago were approached with the prospect that that piece of property was going on the market. And who could have known at that time what might have occurred there had it been purchased by a private purchaser. The folks from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources came down and saw it with a vision of what it could be someday, and that it was, as you've heard so many people say tonight, that it's a treasure that should be preserved for future generations. So the money to purchase that land came from Program Open Space, but it came from the state side of Program Open Space, not the county side. That means the state paid out of a different pot of money than what the county usually gets to buy that property. And the county council at that time had absolutely no intention, and made it very clear that the county was not going to be able, we were not in a position to develop it at that time. We were in the throes of trying to get Henry Parker Sports Complex. Our priorities were somewhere else. But the land was put in a land bank so that at the appropriate time, those who followed them, maybe it's you, maybe it's the next council, I don't know, but it's in public hands so that it can be properly developed through a process, as Mr. Culver has described tonight, at the right time.
Thank you. Councilman Hall, did you have a comment?
I just want clarification. You're going to present us with a master plan that will include the forest, or are you going to do it as two separate portions? One is the forest and one is the
I
rest
think
of the property?
first of all, I'll show you what we'd like to have done on the farm, the riverside. We'll call it
Right.
riverside versus the forest side. The forest side is basically going to be left up to the committees that we have had look at it,
Okay.
as well as the forestry industry.
All right,
I'm
so
not a forester.
two separate portions.
Yes, I'm not a forester, and I'm not going to, claim to do
Joe,
that.
I think we can probably answer some of your questions about the forest itself with Dr. Stribling here, if she will be willing to come up and sit in front of us.
I don't have a lot of information right now.
We can hear that.
Well,
We can hear that. We can hear your pen. We can hear that. Thanks.
And so I'll ask the questions, and because I know the answers, I think, and
Thank you, softballs.
You're leading the witness? You paying for me? Are you leading the witness?
yeah, right. I sit on the committee, so I've heard Mr. Hurd's presentation a couple of times now, and what he's proposed, and it's true that he's going to forest, or plans on foresting in 4 sections, correct?
I think there are actually 6 sections.
6 sections.
Yeah, and we've had discussions in our committee about the potential for maybe, and he's even said, there's one part of that in the back that is totally wetland, that it may not even be possible to get equipment in there. Our committee has thrown around the idea, at least, of maybe setting aside the back portion, and not logging it, because it's not going to yield much at all. And because it does provide potential amphibian and reptile habitat and perhaps forest interior dwelling bird habitat.
And more indigenous trees to the eastern shore also, correct? And some of them
Well,
are relatively
older,
unusual.
more hardwoods.
More hardwoods.
Yeah, the proportion of hardwoods is much greater in the back sections than it is in the front. Although there was a die-off from gypsy moss a few years ago that took out a lot of hardwoods, and what's left isn't really great quality. I was actually struck by how poor it looked in
Poor
the
the
back,
quality is,
rather
right.
than this. I mean, in the front section, it's a pretty robust, not mature forest by any means. It's a mature pine forest, which is an early successional stage. So the mature forest would be, maples and oaks and hickories like that. But in the back, it's a lot less. There's a lot less cover. There's a lot less stem density back there.
And the pine forest in the front is overgrown, it's crowded.
From what Mr. Hurd explained to us when we did our trip out there, and just by looking at it, the trees are fairly close together, which interestingly enough makes them a little bit more valuable in some way because they would be really good, what did he call it? Whole timber or something like that. They're really straight and tall. They're much taller than they might be if they were spaced out more. But there are some hardwoods in there. There are a few mature hardwoods in there that he talked about, avoiding.
Selective cutting.
I don't know if it's possible to go in and thin it at this point. I think that would be really difficult for a logging operation, and maybe Mr. Kilmer can tell me more about that. But it seems to me that harvesting those front two sections, it would be difficult to cut less, not to cut most of it out. But I'm not a forester. So
And what was the time period for cutting?
I think they were talking about within the next 5 or so, several years, starting one of those and
One
then another
section.
40. It was a pretty long.
It was over 40-year
rotational
time period.
Yeah, 40-year time period. So it wasn't.
45 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would be reevaluated every time
Right.
before it was cut.
reevaluate probably every 5 years. Yeah.
One of the citizen comments did raise an interesting point, and that is that if you look down the road a ways at Muddy Hole Swamp, at some of the logging operations that have taken place there in the last 20 years, a number of those forests did not come back. They were replaced by Phragmites because of sea level rise.
Right.
And this forest is not in that tidal region yet, but give it 20 years. No,
Are there Phragmites on the property?
I don't think I don't remember seeing any.
I
Was
think
there?
some around that pond area,
Around the pond.
toward the marsh area.
On the other
On
side,
the
but
other
in the
side.
forest
Riverside.
side.
Not on the riverside.
But when you disturb a forest in a really low marshy
Sure.
area like that, you can get that. You can get Phragmites pretty easily.
This pen down the map.
Does that answer your question, Mr.
How'd I do?
Yeah, we appreciate your input, seriously.
Thanks for your help on this, and our committee is going to continue to discuss it. We meet next week. The letter I sent you said the 19th. That was wrong.
That's wrong, okay.
Yes.
So this-
we will meet next week.
The project, I guess, right now is just completely on hold until we
Well, it's
have
still a planning
plan to
process, yeah.
Very, very
And we really want people to help give us suggestions. Unfortunately, this has all seemed to have taken a life of its own. With Facebook, as much as that can be helpful, it can also be harmful. There's some misrepresentations out there. And
Well, I guess
Letting them out.
the concern is whether there's anything that's done, any measures taken in reference to the house or any measures taken in reference to the forest. The public really wants to know what will happen before that. In other words, will there be some formal announcement? Will there be a public hearing for input? Right now, it's just sort of in limbo. And I think a lot of people, as you heard tonight, are a little bit concerned that measures are going to be taken before they've had a chance to.
well, we will
Be made aware
definitely
of
bring
it.
it back to council as well as groups like Dr. Shribling's here to analyze and that type of thing. Now, as far as the house, if the house is termite ridden and is not savable, then no, I'm not bringing that to a committee to look at. I'm going to get rid of it before it becomes a hazard. So,
Well, we'd appreciate it if you would at least let the council know, because we're going to get the phone calls and the emails. We would appreciate if you let the council know. And I would really suggest that we hold an open work session to discuss what measures you're going to take with the house. Either way, it never hurts to have more input, and we'd like to know exactly, if you do plan to tear it down, we'd like to know why. And it wouldn't hurt to have an open meeting.
I'll be glad to take council out there if you'd like to go.
Yeah. It's fine.
I think one other pressing concern, if you will, is the erosion of the shoreline. If you've been out to the property, the river really narrows, and it makes a very hard turn. And as barge traffic comes up the river, coming up the river has to make a very hard turn to the starboard. Going down the river has to make a hard turn to the port. And when they do that, the tug's prop backwash has a significant impact on that shoreline, and we're losing that shoreline. We've met with MDE and DNR to discuss with them how we can stabilize the shoreline, and that's critically important because we're going to continue to lose it, and that's irresponsible.
Yeah, 3 points when we get a chance.
No, go ahead.
All right. How many years are left on the farm lease?
Should be, well, this year and next year.
Okay, so 2 years.
Two farm
Yeah,
years.
June 17, I think.
What are the current rules and regulations on, say, if I, as a farmer, leased a piece of land, access from the public onto that land?
We gave him complete right to that property,
Okay,
you know, with
So-
the exception at the time there was a tenant in the house.
right.
And that was the only one that had permission to go on the property.
So what I'm concerned about is setting a precedent here where the public feels that they have the permission to go on any county-owned land, regardless if there's a farming lease or hunting lease. And last fall, I know the folks who had the hunting lease on this property, and on Saturdays during deer season, there were organized trips to walk around that property
Yes.
through these people's,
Facebook
hunting trails, and so that's a public
a concern.
hazard. So
Safety issue.
yeah, so we need to either make it clear that this property is not for walks through the woods, that it has an active hunting lease and 2-year farm lease left on it before it becomes a public park, or we need to cancel those things, I think, the hunting lease and the farm lease, because I see some issues developing.
Can you have a hunting lease if it's property that's purchased through open space funding?
They had no problem with it. Talked to them.
Okay, no restrictions. Okay.
It's outdoor recreation.
Not for the deer, but
Answer is yes, Mr. Cannon.
So what's the council's role in this? Because we have a lot of people asking us, well, what can I do? And I'm like, well, I'm not even sure what the council's role in terms of all of this is. So can you, what, in terms of what you're planning on doing, what is the council's role in approval or, going forward? So.
We'll work together on it.
Yeah,
You got your
it
stuff to do, we know
determine-
that.
It's a matter of what part of the plan for the property you're speaking of. Obviously, if there's funding that's needed, then council has got to appropriate those funds. In terms of entering into leases, we've got to come to council. I think it's hard to answer that question until we know what our development plans are going to be for the property.
the most important, you all cover the whole county. And I want to know what your constituents want to do with this property, just like we did out on Lebanon Shield Road. So, come to us and tell us if, people say we want to do this, or we want to have a garden out there, or a community garden,
Well,
let us know.
you heard from a lot of the people that in my district who are telling me, so that's they let you know. So, yeah.
I'm okay with it. I have no problem with it. You
Just-
had 3 problems, 3 points.
No, that was it. I went through all 3 really quick. But
Oh, you did well.
just going back to the hunting issue, April 18th is turkey season. And that's, I would argue, the most dangerous time in the woods. There's no orange that has to be worn. So we need to set these rules and regs pretty quick if we're not going to allow people.
Hopefully some of those people that are on the Facebook page and help direct that can get that
Make
out.
people aware there's an active hunting lease. Yeah.
There's a hunting lease on there.
It might be best to just post the property,
We'll post.
otherwise you
Yeah.
might have.
We'll post the property.
Okay.
I also didn't know, you had a gentleman spoke tonight, John Giffen. with Salisbury University, said that they had 2 classes, capstone classes, that were studying this exact procedure, what was going on with Pirates Wharf. And that may be a really good resource. We're always trying to tie in with the university. We're always trying to tie into the students. So, we want to try to keep them active and involved in the community and try to keep them here. It'd probably be good to reach out to him and to find out exactly. They may be a huge benefit. So, any other questions?
On the hunting issue, what is the county's liability if, we have this county land where there's a hunting lease?
Question.
No, I know. I'm asking
not a
Rachel
lawyer
or
either.
Paul, that is something of concern. Obviously, if it's not hunting season, there's not,
Right.
it's not an issue. But yeah, what happens if someone accidentally gets shot there? Is it the hunting leases issue?
We would need to look at the wording of the lease. I haven't taken a part in drafting any of those leases, but I would imagine that the county would have built in some form of protection into
All
them.
of them have to have insurance, don't I think, the people that
And,
lease
and,
land?
and
Yes.
the property should be posted.
And there's only
Okay.
4 months out of the
There
year
you
where there's
go.
not an actual hunting season.
Right,
Yeah,
Right.
it's March and then
right.
June,
We'll
July,
follow up.
August. So
We'll follow up.
And we'll
I'm
have
sure
it
it's
posted tomorrow.
Yep.
yeah. Okay, awesome.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
appreciate that.
Thanks, Judith.
That'll get their motor running.
All right.
You don't like that. The land being posted so they can't get.
Civic Center alcohol?
Civic alcohol.
I can give you I can tell you as much as I know at this point in time. Senate Bill 1140 was sponsored by Senators Mathias and Eckerd and was unanimously approved in the Senate. It has crossed over to the House and was heard before the House Committee on Economic Matters on March 29th. Executive Culver and I attended the meeting. It received a favorable recommendation and has moved to second reader. I checked the General Assembly site today, and I haven't seen any update, but I understand that there were a lot of bills that were going to be read today. Basically, if approved, the legislation would establish the availability of a Class B license for the Civic Center. The county would have to apply for that license in the normal process and would be subject to the jurisdiction of the Board of License Commissioners. So we would purchase a license, we'd be subject to their inspections, we would be subject to fine if in fact we were found in violation. I believe we've provided you with Mr. Wilbur's legal research, and he's here this evening to answer any questions you might have regarding that legal research.
Paul?
Mr. Wilbur, please talk into the microphone so the TV audience can hear you.
Council questions?
Paul, I've got this, it says factual background.
Right.
It said in 1946, Mr. and Mrs. Woodcock conveyed the parcel of land to Wicomico County. And the county obtained 2 adjoining parcels. In 1959, Wicomico County conveyed the Woodcock parcel to the Hearn parcel, to the Wicomico War Memorial Building.
Right.
Okay. And then the next paragraph, the Woodcocks joined in the 1959 deed with Wicomico County to remove a possibility of a reverter clause to expressly release the quick claim of any rights they had on the property. It was the same Woodcocks? Was it Mr. and Mrs. Woodcocks or some of their family?
It was Mr. and Mrs. Woodcock. Nice.
And they signed to release any rights they had to the property.
Right.
Does that
Essentially-
mean any rights to promises made to not sell alcohol in there?
Right. In 1946,
Mhm.
that's when they conveyed their parcel
Mhm.
to Wicomico.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Wicomico soon thereafter got a second piece, which is called the Hearn parcel,
Mhm.
which is where the rear of the Civic Center sits.
Mhm.
In 1959, they joined in, the Woodcocks joined in to remove, they had a right of reverter an ability to get the property back if alcohol were sold or consumed.
They had a
They had a right to get the property back.
if alcohol was consumed.
They put that on in the 46 deed,
Mm-hmm.
took it off in the 59 deed. In the 59 deed, Wicomico County put the alcohol restriction on both pieces when they conveyed it to War Memorial Builders. In 71, War Memorial Builders conveyed it back out to Wicomico County. There was no restriction on that deed.
How did it come off that time? The last time?
It was conveyed without any restriction at all, and legally what had happened then was the ownership had all merged back into Wicomico County.
Well, I guess my question is if the Woodcocks, I know this has been discussed by many councils. I think probably every council since it was given to them, probably, given to the county. And I keep hearing about the promise. The promise should trump, any deeds, whatever. But you're saying the Woodcocks agreed to take that off?
In 1959. Woodcocks were out of it in 1959.
Still had the covenant, and the county put a
The county put the covenant on, but the Woodcocks were out of the picture in 1959.
I guess I'm wondering why the county did that. Were they asked to do that by the Woodcocks, you think?
Oh, no.
We don't know, do we?
Don't. You could go back and look for minutes of
That would be
1959
hard to
meetings.
find. That
Yeah.
would be hard to find. In knowing what I know about Mr. Woodcock's history and his, I'll call it hatred of alcohol, I can't hardly imagine them taking that off unless there was some other agreement made. Suddenly, he didn't become convinced that there should be alcohol served at the Civic Center. I can't see that happened. I mean, he was very strong-willed against alcohol, and
What I do know is someone told me that Mrs. Woodcock did not die until the 1990s. So that may have influenced council thinking, just a observation on my part.
so it was other councils thinking that Mr. Woodcock and them still did not want alcohol served there, being the fact they give them the land.
It could have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm doing my analysis based on what I see in the deeds.
I understand.
Right.
And I understand the legality of it and what you've done, what I can understand of it. My problem is the promise that was made, and the reason they gave it, and that's going to be hard for me to overcome.
What promise? That's what I'm asking.
The promise of not serving alcohol on the property.
Who gave the promise?
The county did when they accepted the land. Yeah.
After that, I just took that off.
This is what we're being told, and I'm having I don't know why. I can't understand why they did. I can't understand. I don't think that. I don't know because I wasn't there and can't ask him now. But I can't understand somebody that was that strong against alcohol consumption and wanted to have that place used for youth that would suddenly change their minds and say that it's okay to serve alcohol there now. I can't.
I mean, I think that, Mr. Wilbur, you've done, excellent legal work here. You've, I think it appears, have cleared up the legal situation here. For whatever reason, in 1971, if it was reverted back without the covenant, whether that was an oversight or whether it was intentional, you can't say, and we can't say. We don't know the intention. It seems like it may have been an oversight. It's neither here nor there. If it's legally extinguished, it's legally extinguished. So it seems the legal question might be settled, and now it's more of the political question, or Joe, more immoral question, in Joe's terms about keeping a promise. So that, we always ask, what's the covenant? What's that say? And I appreciate the fact that you've done some research, and I think, Wayne, you said you'd be happy to provide us with all the original documentation, because I've always wanted to see what the covenant said, and I guess you found it. So I understand what Joe's saying, and I think you're both correct, you know, that it's legally, it seems to be right, and the county executive, it seems to have the power to do it. I think Joe has a point, though, too, in the fact that the intention was this, and even if in 1971, maybe there was an oversight there, does that take away the kind of the moral promise that was made back in 1946, or does something that long ago still bind us? I mean, I don't know.
To that point, there's a whole nother line of legal analysis, and that's called the waiver line. Based on what I've been told by various individuals, since 1971, even perhaps before 1971, there have been a number of events at the Civic Center where alcohol has been distributed, and you might say sold, because someone paid at these events to have bars where alcohol was distributed to people who were at the event. And multiple incidents of this over decades, legally, that constitutes a waiver of any covenant. So there's really two strong arguments
It
here.
also says what they were doing is wrong.
I have something.
I would say a waiver.
So if you speed down the road 80 mile an hour for 5 years and don't get caught, and then you get caught one day, you can claim waiver?
Yes.
When
When you have a covenant on land
I understand.
and you violate that covenant time and time and time again, you lose your right to enforce it.
When the
That's called a
property,
waiver.
Wait a minute.
When
Wait a
the-
minute. You're
wait-
saying, excuse
wait.
me, John. Let me finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you repeat what you just said.
Right. For the sake of discussion, say there
Okay.
was a covenant on that property, and that covenant was violated time and time again for decades.
Right.
That, in legal speak, is a waiver of the
Okay.
covenant.
Okay.
The-
Who
The
has
ability to enforce the covenant has gone.
So the person that's breaking the covenant is the person that can't enforce it anymore? Is that what you're saying?
The person who would want to enforce the
it.
covenant,
Being it's been broken for so many times?
correct.
If they were made aware of it.
If they were made aware.
If they were made aware of it.
From what I understand, these events at the Civic Center were well-known.
But the Woodcocks weren't there to be aware of it.
Mr.
well,
Wilbur?
my,
They were dead.
Joe, my issue, I think, is really, part of this is, property was deeded in 1947 with a covenant. At that time, it was a ball field,
To be used as a baseball
to
field.
be used as a baseball field. As soon as they built the Civic Center, the rules changed.
Wait a minute, did it say, no, the rules didn't change. Did it say that it was to be used as a baseball field in the,
I believe so, Joe.
Well, it was conveyed with that
I can-
intent. There was no intent of the Civic Center ever showing up on that piece of
I
property.
can
It was
speak to
baseball
that.
field.
I did a lot of I read all the 1946 notes to look and see what they actually discussed. And there was talk of it being a stadium of sorts. It didn't mention whether it was inside or outside. It then became, it wasn't until, I can't remember the exact date, but I have a timeline that I drafted up of exactly the first time an arena is mentioned, like the concept of a civic center building.
I grew up here,
yeah.
and I remember the stadium. It was a wooden fenced baseball
You're
stadium.
a lot older than I am, so I don't remember it.
That's a reference.
I will tell you what the deed says. All right, the 1946 deed. It says, a recreational center primarily for the youth of Wicomico County, State of Maryland, as well as for citizens of Wicomico County, State of Maryland.
Yeah, that's why it's
That's
called
what it says.
Wicomico County Youth and Civic Center.
Larry?
Right?
Yeah, I think you did a good job, and you highlighted everything, but there's still some what-ifs. There's a lot of what-ifs there, and I was just at Parkside baseball game yesterday, and several people come up to me and talked about the chicken houses, and several of them, older and younger, were talking about the alcohol being served there, and I think we kind of have a moral issue with that too. And one of the things that we just discussed too is the property was donated, and then we also discussed, what if somebody else wants to donate property or something to us, and then they see that we reneged on a deal, if that's what you want to call it. So we're drawing a fine line there, so I don't know, we're gonna have a hearing on it, obviously, but previous councils didn't touch this for some reason.
No, they did. They touched
I-
it, but they
well,
didn't go for it.
They didn't want to touch it and go forward as far as what I mean. But I'm wondering why the previous attorneys didn't dig in deeper or if they did, what did
I
they
can't
call it?
really speak to that. you know.
Is that, I know it's been brought up numerous times. When I sat here in 2002, 2006, it was brought up then, and everybody said, no, we're not going to mess with it because people were against it.
I guess I'm going to ask the question that Mark asked. What is our role in it? Is it something that we have to approve? Or is it something the executive's office does on its own?
Well, I have certainly rendered my legal opinion that, in my view, the covenant no longer is on the Civic Center. And I think the executive has adopted that legal opinion and has gone to the legislature and asked the legislature to create a special section in the state law which will allow Wicomico County to apply for a liquor license. And of course, that's a hearing process.
It's a public
But,
process.
but we don't
Yeah.
hold liquor license hearings at county
No,
council.
the Board of License Commissioners will hold that hearing.
So
Yeah.
are you saying that this is something that won't come to the council? Is that what you're trying to say, or doesn't have to come to the council?
I do not believe it has to come to the council.
That's what I was afraid of that.
It may need to be vetted publicly, I don't know. This isn't a bad forum for it, or else you could have your own. Any other questions?
But
I
just,
have one question.
I'll make a statement, and I'll tell you what a longtime politician told me. He said, and I'll say who it was. It was Lewis Raleigh. I asked him about it the other day. He said there's a lot of young people that'll like it. There's a lot of older people that won't, and the majority of people don't care one way or the other. He said, so you're not in a very good position there. But I'm going to voice my opposition to it. I think we made a promise a long time ago. And I understand the revenue part, and Paul, I think you've done a good job of what you did. And I do understand the revenue part, but I'm going to have to steadfast to, I think, stay where I'm at.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Call Bob. I'll tell him to call you.
Are you going to have the public hearing at the Civic Center for the alcohol license? All right, well, thanks for keeping us informed.
You're the only thing between me and my ice cream for tonight.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Joe.
When you get old, you have bowl ice cream.
Like that idea. I forgot my book. Never do. I'll use it.
Good afternoon, Council President, Council members. For the record, Keith Hall, Department of Planning and Zoning. We're here today to discuss the draft comprehensive plan as part of our ongoing conversations about a plan update to our current 1998 comprehensive plan, which was amended back in 2009. If you'll bear with me 1 second. Sanders, one West Coast. A brief presentation. The outline for tonight's overview is looking at the first 5 chapters of the comprehensive plan. Not to quantify it, but it's approximately less than 1/3 of the entire document. We'll be looking at some elements that, while they are germane to the overall discussion, they do not have the level of substance that more complex chapters of the plan will have, including land use and transportation. However, it doesn't mean that they're no less important. In addition, they kind of serve as the foundation and the framework for preparing this plan update. Also important to note that this plan, as I've said before, had extensive public involvement over the past few years. And as such, you know, in our profession, just like in yours, with what you're working with this legislation, you never want to come to the table with prepared legislation in your back pocket. You want to vet it to your community, to your constituents. You want to have buy-in. You want them to be the cheerleaders and carry forth what you're trying to implement. This planning effort is no different. While a comprehensive plan is not regulatory in nature, the implementation of it does have some regulatory controls through our zoning code, our subdivision regulations, our zoning map, for example, and it will also have considerations for capital programming. efforts as this county council looks forward to doing improvements and maintaining our infrastructure. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to read the first 5 chapters. Again, briefly just going over the introduction. I've listed the major components up here. I love PowerPoint. I've listed some of the major components, but if this doesn't work, it's no big deal. First of all, the purpose of the plan, we kind of went over that last time. As the county continues to grow and population continues to increase, we need to have a roadmap of where we want future growth and development to occur, while at the same time trying to protect and preserve our natural resources and our environment. Something that we've heard that was very near and dear to our citizens tonight when talking about potential poultry operations coming into Wicomico County that are of a scale of different magnitude than we're used to. A little bit of the plan talks about the history of planning in Wicomico County. Since 1943, the city and county have been doing joint planning activities. The planning department was approximately established in the early 60s. And the purpose of that planning department was to provide professional and technical planning expertise to elected officials such as this body, appointed boards and commissions, as well as the general public and assisting local municipalities, and looking at community issues that we face that are concerning that need to be addressed in a professional manner.
Mr. Cannon, as an historical tidbit, Patrick Hannon,
Hannon, P.J. Hannon.
yeah, Patrick Hannon was the first draftsman on the first planning staff in the early 1960s. That's it.
Okay. Moving on, comprehensive planning is not new to Wicomico County. Any jurisdiction in Maryland that has planning and zoning authority has prepared a comprehensive plan. Our first comprehensive plan was in 1982. Subsequently, the update to that occurred in 1998, and that plan was amended in 2009 with the incorporation of the water resources element. Overall, the plan has 14 chapters, which you can read about in the plan introduction about the purpose of them, as well as 3 new chapters, the new chapters being the previously mentioned water resources element. There is an agricultural element for the consideration of the council. We'll be getting into that at our next meeting, and that has implications of whether or not this council would like to endorse the county moving forward with getting recertified for our ag certification program by the state.
I have a question.
Yes, sir, Joe Holloway.
I know we have talked about the connection between this and our poultry legislation. And I brought up last time about the small towns and villages that have growth areas around them. And it's my understanding that the folks that own the land that are in those growth areas can opt out of that. Is that correct?
As part of this comprehensive planning process, if I understand your question correctly, we are seeking citizen input if they are looking for a change in use of their land. For example, without getting into specifics, several property owners came forward to the Planning Commission looking for, usually it's an intensification of their land. And what you're trying to predicate a sound decision on so it doesn't become a political or arbitrary decision is what's changed in the context of the neighborhood. Is a new road coming in? Are facilities such as water and sewer going into those regions? And from that, you can justify decisions. I think as part of this council discussion when we're getting into land use, that you will see recommendations coming in both ways, that there are some people that are in these growth areas between the small towns that do not want to be zoned for intense growth and would actually like to go back to agricultural zoning.
Well, their concerns are that if they wanted to add on to their poultry farms, they may have to go to a special exception if they're included in the growth area. And basically, there's no growth out there. Okay.
Correct.
But now, with that said, can the same apply to around Salisbury? If somebody wants to opt out of the growth area?
That would be a consideration, yes, and we would bring that consideration and a recommendation to the council for their review as well as their direction.
Who would make that decision? The council or the planning commission?
Ultimately, the planning commission, if the council feels comfortable The planning commission can always be involved in those type of decisions because it would be a change to what the planning commission has approved.
Well-
So therefore, I think there is a level of coordination that does need to occur. And if we're going to move in that process where we do take the land use considerations or the request back to the planning commission, I would recommend we do it as a batch process instead of individual piecemeal. We go back at one time so the public's aware and they can have input.
How hard is, okay, we'll use a piece of land close to Salisbury as an example, and someone wants to opt out of the growth area, and we do that for them. Okay, because probably two things: their taxes are higher if they're in the growth area. That might be the case, or they do want to go to explore the poultry.
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay.
taxes
I'm
are higher in
saying
the growth
they
area.
could be.
Except if they're in the municipality, yes, or if the land is changed from agricultural to a subdivision, then the assessment, they lose the agricultural
I've
assessment.
got an example, if you don't mind, that I can provide that I think puts us in the context. Some of these areas between the small towns, and I'm going to use Pittsville and Willards, for example, that whole corridor in between is designated for growth.
Right.
Well, you're not
That's the
seeing-
one I'm
you're-
referring to.
You're not seeing that type of growth. Now, what that has done to some of the rural property owners in between those two jurisdictions has limited the flexibility of what they can do with their land. It's provided them an intensification of residential use. There's no market. What it's eliminated is their ability to get ag preservation dollars voluntarily.
And
I think people now have finally come out of the craze of the early 90s of the development boom and are starting to realize that, this is their chance. This county does not do spot rezonings. Rezonings happen as a result of changes to this comprehensive plan or a change or mistake that can be documented and justified.
no, that's what I
So this is the opportunity to have these type of discussions.
So, I mean, yeah, because I had the same, looking at the map and looking at Pittsville and Willards, I mean, that's all designated growth area, but you look around Sharptown, and there's very limited, it seems like I don't want to say more reasonable, but it is more reasonable, in terms of how Sharptown's going to grow. It's very limited next to the borders, whereas Pittsville and Willards, I mean, that's the whole, the whole area.
I think there was a concept that once upon a time, they were looking at combining water and sewer systems.
back in the early.
So that was going to be the logical connection, and that would encourage that type of intensification of growth. However, I don't think those conversations are taking place at this time.
Back in the early 70s, when Willards had to put in sanitary sewer, Farmers Home Administration lent them the money for it. And there was rumor that Pittsville was going to have to do the same, so they tried to talk them, Pittsville residents, into joining with Willards. Pittsville resisted at the time, and then about 10 years later, Pittsville had to put their own system in, so they would have been ahead of the game if they'd joined forces at the time. So that's, I think, when all that was joined together.
But this would be the process where we could re-examine that sort of thing and maybe say, hey, this just doesn't hold up anymore.
Absolutely,
and
with
remove some of that.
with extensive public input. Anytime you're down zoning a property, typically people are concerned about that because there is a perception that it could be a decrease in their value. So it's a very delicate balance.
I would prefer, instead of us looking at those and analyzing property owners, if it's property owner driven, come in.
Right.
Look, this really doesn't belong in that.
That's the baseline that the planning commission has
Right.
served up to this council.
Well-
They've went through all the requests, they went through the analytics of what the department recommendations were, as well as what they felt comfortable with. However, again, this is an open planning process. I do feel that we are going to see requests coming in.
It's odd. 7 years ago, we were having the other side of the fight, but the land might be worth more as farmland now as in development land because there's no development. So you wouldn't really call it downzoning.
That's one way to look at it.
Semantics.
It keeps going back to, we want to provide the most opportunities and flexibility we can.
Yeah.
And especially for the rural property owners, because a lot of times their land is 401k.
Right.
What might have been perceived in the 2000 market, that every piece of land had intense residential value to it. It developed above rural county standards. And now we're all getting older. The investment portfolio might look a little different, and an easement potentially could be something that people are looking at, or through a land donation. These are going to be the issues this council will work collectively through. Staff will be there to guide you with recommendations.
The other problems down there is Pittsville and Willards are pretty much maxed out on their water and sewer. So they,
Today,
yeah.
however,
Yeah.
we're trying to look at a plan that stands the course of 15 to 30 years. I think it's very important to note that your 1998 plan, terrific plan, it has not been in front of the council to be disputed from a land use perspective. What the public disputed back in 2008 and 2009 was more of the zoning code like you're hearing today, and it was directly related to the density in the rural zone areas of the county. Well, the market is taking care of itself today. We've got enough surplus for probably 10 to 15 years on the books. However, we do have to be cautious and make sure that whatever we do, we understand and we've minimized those unintended consequences moving forward. So, just quickly wrapping up on chapter 1. The planning law section, the annotated code of Maryland is what prescribes the jurisdiction to complete or prepare a comprehensive plan. It says what elements you have to have in it. Some elements are required by law. We're a charter county. In addition, it tells you about the plan adoption process. For a charter county, the plan is prepared by the commission. That is their responsibility. The plan is approved by the commission and then forwarded to the legislative body for their review and their action. We'll talk a little more about some of the state legislative bills that have shaped the new plan and how it's different versus the 98 plan, but again, we're going to do that in a Reader's Digest format.
Keith, in chapter 1, you referenced the priority funding area, and I know it's Priority Funding Act 97, but I thought someone had told me more recently here that the state of Maryland was dropping that designation and referencing only to this designated growth area instead of the priority funding area.
I've not been apprised of that news.
Okay.
The priority funding area is still the way that the state is making decisions from a capital programming standpoint of where they want to invest for public infrastructure and support of smart growth principles. Moving on to chapter 2, if there's no more further questions. Development goals and objectives. These are the overarching goals that the public has come up with. As you can see, and I'm not going to read them to you, there's several themes here. Orderly growth, controlled growth, protecting the environment, retaining our rich agricultural history, and being the center for academic, institutional, and medical services in the region. These hold true for the 98 plan, and I'm sure if we go back to the 82 plan, this is what was important to the citizenry. These goals will help us formulate what becomes the foundation for the policies that are going to be established, as well as the implementation strategies that are going to be recommended within each of the chapters of the plan.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
I want you to interrupt me as much as you
I
want.
don't think these guys do, but still in chapter 1, you got ahead of me. On 1.7, there's referencing House Bill 474, and you're talking about Sustainable Community Act of 2010.
Yes, sir.
And it says that, and extending the life of the credit through 2014. Because we're now in 2016, is this something that's sort of outdated? Is it relevant?
I think it still gives the relevancy, that the historical standpoint, and in addition, it's not contradictory to anything currently or moving forward.
Okay, on the next page, you referenced the fact, in the middle of the page, you're talking about the septic bill, and you're saying that the adoption is uncertain, referencing the tier map. We might maybe take that out.
At the discretion of the council. We'd like to take that out. We're seeking that direction. However, again, from a staff perspective, Council President and council members, we're not trying to get you to adopt something you might not be comfortable with, whether it's a tier map or any portion of this comprehensive plan. We're trying to afford you the same opportunities as a citizenry and provide flexibility should something change. In addition, for contextual purposes, the plan has had many iterations since 2010 in draft form. Hopefully this will be the council that adopts it. However, there's no certainty in anything with that as well. So we just try to factor in that language to make sure that all bases are covered.
Mr. Cannon, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Given what Keith has just said, on page 1.6, could you briefly explain the relevance of House Bill 1160 in 2006 That's the
That's the workforce.
workforce housing element.
Connected, man.
Yes, without getting into too much detail, and without having to go back almost 10 years now and give a, preamble to it. It was a new element. It's not required by state law to be in your plan. However, if there's federal monies through the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Fund, if you're a part of an entitlement community, in order to be eligible for those funds, there has to be a workforce element or a housing element in your comprehensive plan.
Should I wait then till we get to chapter 11 to,
I request that you do, please.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, I don't want to skip over anymore. I'm glad to see everybody's taken a very keen interest in planning legislation because we've known, since 2006, it's been quite extensive.
Back to chapter 2.
Please.
We had chapter 2 now.
We can go to chapter 5 if you like.
I mean, we'll just hop around, yeah. Under your first objective, it talks about the increase in households in the county going up to 49,650.
Almost 50,000 households, which is an increase of about 12,000 households of where we are right now.
And you just mentioned the capacity of the already subdivided land in the county, but I didn't do the math fast enough. Do we have enough capacity in our pre-subdivided lands to, I know these aren't all
No,
going
you
out
would
in the
not,
county.
for what's
but-
subdivided in just the unincorporated portion of the
Yeah.
county that is maybe sitting on the books but not been recorded
Right.
yet, I think, and we'll do some more research, you would not have close to capacity to accommodate 12,000 households.
No, okay.
However, in the designated growth area,
Right,
there's more than enough capacity land area-wise, zoned for more intense development,
Yep.
that could easily accommodate that type of development pressure. In addition, in the city of Salisbury alone, they could handle 12,000 more households.
Okay.
Well, that being said, then, is there likely to be sufficient inventory in the unincorporated areas to satisfy those future people who don't want to live in a box
That's an excellent point.
underneath,
I'm glad you brought that up.
over and under another box?
But they
We-
won't want to live near chicken farms, man.
That's a delicate balance that we'll continue to work with. That's the incompatibility of uses. That's what you gentlemen are looking at here today. That's why we don't have intense residential development, for example, next to an industrial area. You wouldn't want that. However, it's not all about, this plan focuses on promoting growth where there's planned existing services, but recognizing the importance of people to develop in the unincorporated portion of the county where there isn't public water and sewer today. And it does provide a level of accommodation that could encourage or that could handle the development pressures for the planning horizon of this plan, which is out to 2040. That is one of the considerations that we made as all the cities and towns started drawing out where they wanted to grow around their existing boundary. Some cities and towns didn't pick up the entirety of what the county zoning currently has as a designated growth area. And for that reason alone, the Planning Commission did not want to shrink or limit people's ability to develop in the unincorporated portion of the county at a higher density than in the ag resource area. And I applaud them for their decision. Not everybody wants to live in a city and town, not that there's anything wrong with it. However, we have to make sure as a county that we have accommodations that can look at the future growth of, I think it's 25,000 persons roughly between now and 2040.
Larry? In the designated growth area on septic?
Well,
What's
that's
what's the density allowed?
the density allowed on septic right now, if we just say
Same
the
as in
tier
the ag,
map.
isn't it?
If the tier map was approved and we got everything and we're ready to go, if you're zoned in R20 or most designated growth areas on septic, it's a 20,000 square foot lot.
If the health department would approve.
If you can achieve the perk.
Did you have a question there?
Yeah, Keith,
Yes.
do you know if we're the only county on the eastern shore that doesn't have its own water and sewer?
Doesn't have one?
I don't know as far as water and sewer authority if we're the only county.
We do have water and sewer authority.
No,
As
We
an
have
urban
the
service.
urban services law allows Wicomico
I
County
understand
to
that part.
be in the water and sewer or in any other municipal business. It's not that we don't have the authority, we've never exercised it,
We are.
except in a limited capacity.
However, one of the things you'll see also in the plan is that, again, a planning level policy, appropriate language, plenarese as I like to call it, it has recommendations in here that the county, like they have been over the past 30 to 50 years, starts evaluating whether or not you want to start owning and operating your own systems.
Right.
Without being so prescriptive of saying where you can do it or where you can't do it.
Wicomico County has the unique authority, by that I mean the only county in the state of Maryland that has the broad authority that is provided in our urban services law. No other county in the state has that. So it's not that we don't have the authority, we've never exercised it.
Right.
We
I
don't
didn't
have
ask
money.
if we had.
We've never
authority.
exercised it
Asked if
except
we
in
had our
conjunction
own,
with the municipality.
'cause we're depending on municipalities for
But I
that.
thought the first objective says maintain moderate population growth as an objective, and I just thought that was an odd phrasing. How do we maintain moderate population growth?
There's many ways I could respond to that. However, with the camera being on, I'll do the most appropriate. Are you looking under goals and objectives in chapter 2?
The
I
first-
paraphrased some for the purpose of the presentation.
Sure.
Just let me look at it real quick to make sure. Concentrate development objectives, maintain moderate population growth.
Objective 1.
Yes. What that is we've looked at the population trends. Traditionally, we grow 1,000 persons per year, 10,000 persons per decade in the entirety of Wicomico County. We want to preserve that rate because at that rate, we know that we've had the success or we've achieved keeping up with being able to provide services. If we were to have a tremendous growth in population based on some phenomenon that's not predicted at this time, it's going to be hard to keep up and provide not only the existing services, but to meet the future demand. So it's, again, trying to say, here's how we've grown over the past. We can't control it. We can't put a gate out there at the borders of Wicomico County or build a fence.
Yeah.
But as planners, we have to watch out for spikes in population trends. And as soon as they start occurring, that's when we need to be back in front of our planning commission, as well as working with our executive and our council to make sure that we're doing the appropriate level planning to move forward.
From an economic development perspective, John, the approach to the county has always been to try and attract small and medium-sized businesses, not big companies that would employ 5,000 people, because that's 15,000 population increase, and we wouldn't have any place for them to go to school, et cetera, et cetera.
We wouldn't have the roads to support where their houses need to go. Again, if we were in the water and sewer business, we wouldn't get that far out ahead either. There's nothing.
Not that we turn them away.
Not that we
They're
turn-
watching.
If there is a gold rush, we have to be cautious because we see the demands that we're having right now in our schools. And as our schools are not only aging, but you also have an increasing population or enrollment, then that means more facilities have to be planned, which means more capital expenditures have to occur, which means more debt service that this county has to take on.
Just think of what a large increase in population would do with our maintenance of effort.
We'd have more revenue.
If there's no more questions, just looking at chapter 3, it's a snapshot of what the community characteristics and the community profile is today.
Keith, help me out.
Yes, sir.
On 3.1, halfway down, it says directly influence each of the 11 elements contained in this plan. I couldn't find 11 elements.
You couldn't? Well, that's a problem.
Oh, I know.
Did you go through that 10-page table of contents?
Yes, I did. And it's 18 elements.
What you're looking at is I'm glad you brought that because I had it clarification in my notes. There are 14 chapters, also what we refer to as elements. Okay, the first 3 that we're discussing right now, while they are substantive, they don't have implementation strategies associated with them. They're giving you a background or kind of a comprehensive planning 101. However, I guess I caught the same thing, and in my talking points, I did put 14 chapters. So that's a minor change that we'll make. So there isn't any confusion about, as Councilman Hall is saying, you got a table of contents that says 14, you got something here that says 11. So we'll make sure that is part of the housekeeping that takes place. However, Councilman Hall brings up a good point. When we know, yes, John, when we know our population and we know what our population is going to be, therefore we can start planning on what our land use needs are going to be, what our transportation needs are going to be, what our infrastructure needs are going to be. In addition, it allows us to do trend analysis of looking at where we were at in 2000 or 2010 compared to future plans in 20 or 30 years to try to have an indicator of whether or not we're trending in the right direction or we're trending negatively. You're going to find a ton of socioeconomic, demographics, housing data, labor force data, educational attainment data. All this is mainly census driven and updated annually at this point with the American Community Survey. I'd say all in all, there's probably 50 tables in that section. I won't go over each of them. However, I would recommend that you look over them and see the trends, as well as look at the comparisons between Wicomico County and the state when they are compared. I think it gives some type of context to the discussion of, again, employment is one of the things we would be looking at. Workforce is another thing. Looking at the economic development components of it, I think is very important.
Table 3.6, the vacant housing units in the county, almost 5,000. And this was back in, it says estimates between 2010 and 2014. When we get the update from SWED, the March active inventory is 552. So does that mean that there's 4,500 units that are sitting there not being actively listed?
That's the active inventory for sales.
Okay.
So when you're looking at vacant from a Census Bureau standpoint, it could also be a rental.
Okay.
In addition, and I'm not absolutely positive, but I think SWED only collects data for the city of Fruitland, Delmar, and Salisbury, and does not collect any other municipal data.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of disparity
That's
there
why
as
that number's
well.
so low potentially.
It could be artificially deflating that number. And like any number, we got to know a lot about how it was collected and the methodology. So without having a tremendous background working with Dave Ryan's data, I want to be cautious because the census methodology could be using different definitions and different methodology.
Just to me, that sounds like
That's a lot.
large number, 5,000.
12% of the houses in the
Yeah.
county are empty?
So maybe part of the definition is rentals?
Oh, the rentals are included in that
included in that.
as well, but looking at the census data, a lot of times, from a professional planning standpoint, I won't really differentiate whether it's a lot or not a lot. It's the number that is there.
Sure.
So I'll use that number to compare from census data 5 years from now, and just looking at change detection
It's
purely.
2% higher in Maryland.
Right.
When vacant housing units, I wonder which housing, is it houses just, we've got a house down the road that nobody's lived in for years. I guess they use those. So this come from the census. When they're riding around, they write down where there's nobody at, right?
Well, this comes from the census as part of the American Community Survey.
Yeah.
The difference between the American Community Survey and the decennial census is the decennial census. Everyone is part of that. The American Community Survey is a sampling, a very small size, so the margin of error could be greater with that type of data, and that could be why we're seeing something that doesn't really jive with what our local knowledge is.
We got houses that people can't live in.
That could be included as well,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I look at Dave's information really about the active sales trends, and that's a very good indicator whether it's countywide or not. What's vacant at the time of that census, a snapshot,
Yeah.
might not be vacant today. It's just what we have to work with now.
Due to time restraints, I would like to go through 3 chapters instead of 5. Is council okay with this? We have a closed session that follows this as well. With some,
I don't want to limit you.
I want to
Whatever
make sure
time.
everybody doesn't feel rushed. I want to make sure everybody is
Three
Not
chapters.
only competent here to,
3 chapters
Soak
is a
it all
good
in.
stopping place because again, they're just the foundation and the background. They are germane. But I think moving forward with sensitive areas, water resources element, that's a
Takes
meeting.
a lot of time.
That's a meeting on its own, and there's gonna be more questions because it gets into circumstances like what we're in today, where regulatory actions that impact the county, development in the county, are being done at the state level or the federal level. And it's very important to make those distinctions.
There's only one other point in chapter 3 that I kind of highlighted.
yeah, sure, I'm not shutting it down, I just
Okay,
wanted to,
okay. Table 315, where it talks about the commute to work characteristics. Public transportation, less than 1% of transport to work actually uses public transportation here, where in the state it's almost 9%. I think that's a statistic to keep in mind as we go into budget season.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I agree with you, Councilman Matt Holloway, I think one of the things to look at is the disparity between the two areas. When you're looking at statewide, you've got a large labor force in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. region that is probably more used to using transit or even having multimodal routes to work, which would include the use of transit as well as light rail. Down here, I think it's a little bit different, that transit may be more used for everyday necessities because there isn't the alternative or a car is not available. Whereas there, it might be more of a lifestyle decision.
I look at our public transportation and what we're using for our public transportation, and does that fit with our needs? You know, and Joe Holloway's brought this up for many years now about running buses with hardly any people on them for our public transportation, where maybe a van or a smaller vehicle might fit the bill and be a heck of a lot cheaper. So
I think those are interesting conversations that the council will have with Tri-County
yes,
as part of your budgeting process. It is of interest that it seems like at times we only see the vans that are half or less than half full. However, I think we need to look at ridership and look at routes as a whole.
sure.
And, you know, once those 3 transit agencies merged into one, you know, there's routes that Shore Transit has, and not defending or advocating for them or against them, that the round trip, or what we call the headway of waiting, is 4 hours, 130 miles. Therefore, what you may perceive as an empty bus may have been full 3 miles before then, 5 miles before then. So keep in mind that the system itself, and not just what you see prior to coming up to one stop, and I know the council will do that.
the table 13, 14, what category, I always thought that upholstery industry was in agriculture. It says that the percentage of employment on 13, 14 is only 1.3%. I thought that was awful low. So I didn't know if poultry maybe was in manufacturing instead of agriculture. I'm not really, couldn't find a place where it might be, Keith.
You know, I think that's a real good question. When you're looking at agriculture of 0.5%, something jumps out to my mind.
I have 1.3 in Wicomico.
Yes, 1.3 in Wicomico, 0.5%
In Maryland, which would still be low.
in Maryland. And I think what you're seeing also is that when this is collected, it is a random sampling. It's not a total enumeration. It probably doesn't have in factors built in to look at the fluctuation of seasonal workers. And this would probably be more of a year-round worker. And again, just relative to random sampling, it's all depending on who gets the survey to fill out of what type of information you're going to see. This could have a different look 2 years from now, depending on who's filling out the forms.
Seems kind of unusual because, it's one of our largest industries, and it doesn't look as if it's being considered properly in this comprehensive plan.
Well, I would look to Council Vice President Matt Holloway and his expertise, as well as anybody that's had any experience in farming, in farming operations. It's my general understanding as an outsider looking in, I didn't grow up farming, but I grew up in this community, that farming is labor intensive only in certain periods of the year. Harvesting time, for example. When you're in between planting and harvesting, is there a lot of workers on the farm tending to the crops as they're growing?
Farmers are diversified, you know, they're either raising chickens or growing plants. I don't think they all just sit down after they.
No. I'm saying the labor that supports
Yeah.
the farm. I think more important than using this as an indicator of whether farming is prominent or not, I would recommend that you go to the agricultural chapter, chapter 6, and look at the ag census. And that's going to tell you how many farms there are, how many acres in farm there are, what's the value of products, and it's going to look from 1997 all the way to 2012, and that's going to give you a better snapshot.
I think what John's concern is all the people that work in the office at Purdue or in the processing plant, are they included in this ag?
They're not included in the
Well, they should be.
They're not included in the agricultural part of where people work.
Are they manufacturing?
That would be in a different sector altogether. It's going to probably be, if going back to the executives at a poultry company, that's going to be probably more along the lines of professional, and that's where they're going to fall in.
Shouldn't we place most of that in ag though to show, because ag is our number one industry?
Well, I don't know what, this is census data.
It's a US.
So it doesn't mean,
Oh, we can't change it.
that's where I was going and you saved the council 5 minutes.
Okay.
It means take it with a grain of salt, and we'll do our best to make sure that you can understand why certain things don't appear like knowing the landscape it should appear.
Maybe there could be some clarification in the document, when you talk about table 314, it would be really helpful if you were to try to maybe insert that in there as
That
to
would be good.
what role poultry plays here, since it's a major operation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's nothing more than making a connection to chapter 6.
Right.
All right.
And that's the connectivity of the document.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure
All right.
that's
Sounds
taken
good.
care of.
Sounds good.
Isn't that good?
Let's say it.
Sod comes right underneath the poultry.
It's a pretty distant second.
It is
Less than
distant.
10%. I can strive.
How about lettuce?
Other than that, gentlemen, again, read it, enjoy it. I'm glad to see the detail of discussion that we're having tonight. Keep in mind, what you're seeing, what we've reviewed so far is not the meat of the document. It's literally the framework.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll be getting into more discussions about implementation measures and what that means in its relationship to the codes, how we do it, and what type of actions required.
I have to commend you all for putting this together. It's a monumental document.
You don't want a grammatical
It's,
email or if they see anything.
The Maryland Department of Planning has said it's virtually typographically free of errors. I'm going to use them as the authority. However,
All right.
I would recommend that you can email me any revisions, grammar, typos, or I can send you the document.
And I can do it?
You can do it, however, we're going to have to put changes on
Yeah.
it and review it with the council again.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen, that's the precursor. Thank you for your time,
Thank you.
and look forward to the next meeting.
thank you very much, Keith.
Keith, thank you.
Good job, Keith.
Entertain a motion to close the open work session so we can go into closed session.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
To you, y'all.